All right, for criminal, let's move on to criminal. So for criminal, let's look at form books, treatises, and treatises as digests. You have agreed to represent a young adult who initially pled guilty in a pending criminal matter. You have been retained by the family specifically to withdraw the guilty plea. After interviewing the client and reviewing the case, you begin your representation by preparing a motion to withdraw plea in compliance with Connecticut Practice Book 39-16. This motion does require a Memorandum of Law. How could someone get a better understanding of how the court views and treats this type of a motion?
They could begin by conducting case research using Connecticut Criminal Case Law Handbook, a practitioner's guide. This is a treatise written by Justice Katz prior to her appointment to the bench. This publication offers strong insight into criminal matters and also serves as a type of criminal law digest. But please note that this publication has not been supplemented since 1992 and requires substantial case law updating.
Great, thank you, Marianne. So eventually a plea bargain is worked out with the state's attorneys. Based on further discussion with your client and his family, you realize that it is in his best interest for your client to be moved from the facility where he is currently confined to the Manston Youth Institution in order to give him the opportunity to participate in a treatment program for anger management that is offered to Manson inmates. Tony, where could someone find a sample of both a motion to withdraw plea, along with the accompanying Memorandum of Law, and a motion to transfer from facility?
Claudia, both those motions can be found in Connecticut Criminal Legal Forms, authored by the late Judge Richard Morano. This publication offers a wealth of sample criminal forms. A drawback to this publication is its lack of an index. Like the Connecticut Law Tribune form books, access is through the table of contents, and the book is arranged in the order and stages that a case progresses. It is also important to note that although this set consists of 2 volumes, one does not follow the other in covering phases of the case progression. Rather, both publications provide samples for the entire process. The volumes were published at different times and each contains material not found in the other. When using this resource, it is important to review both volumes. Another source with selected sample forms is the LexisNexis Practice Guide on Connecticut Criminal Law by Seeger. This treatise has an example of the motion to withdraw the plea.
Thank you. So as you continue on with your representation, you will find that these titles really are of great value. Records and briefs will also be of value for locating examples of prior filed criminal motions, which can be accessed using the Connecticut Criminal Case Law Handbook as a digest, as Marianne had mentioned. So I am now going to turn this back over to Taryn for her questions.
Panel, you had mentioned needing to update the case references in the Case Law Handbook. How would I go about doing this, Marianne?
Taryn, you could shepherdize the cases using Lexis, or you can use KeyCite, which is available through Westlaw.
Great. And then Tony, the LexisNexis practice guide that you had mentioned, would that be accessible on the Law Library's Lexis account?
No, unfortunately not. It's not part of our contract.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have one more scenario, so I will give it back to Claudia.
So for our last scenario, your client has been charged with possession of narcotics. At the time of the stop, she allowed a search of her car, but she now says she did not know that at the time she could have withheld consent to the search. You are thinking of filing a motion to suppress the narcotics seized during the search. Where would you go for information on this process and example motion? Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Sure. For a sample of the motion to suppress, I would again go back to Connecticut Criminal Legal Forms by Morano. And for a discussion on the procedure, I would suggest both the LexisNexis Practice Guide, Connecticut Criminal Law, and the publication Connecticut Criminal Procedure by Judge Schumann.
Oh, and Michelle, don't forget the Connecticut Practice Series, Volume 4, on Connecticut criminal procedure and volume 5 on criminal jury instructions. Both are good sources of information on this topic.
So you have filed the motion, and the prosecution has filed an objection citing State v. Jenkins. After reading this decision, you decide that you want to use some of the argument in Justice Katz's dissent in your oral argument. You want to study the original filed motion and argument for that particular case. Where can I find that?
Claudia, I would go back to the Connecticut records and briefs, and noting the argue date of State v. Jenkins, I would look for the motion and the accompanying memorandum in the record.
Great, thank you, Michelle. That ends our narcotics and our last scenario. So Taryn, questions?
So Tony, you had mentioned the research guides that are produced by the law libraries earlier. Are there any on these types of criminal issues?
Well, to this point, we've been producing mostly civil and family research guides. We have just started a criminal research guide section, and we have one produced so far. It's on probation.
Okay, great. And then also, would the library have non-Connecticut sources for any criminal pleadings and motions?
Sure, we do, Taryn. We have AMJUR pleading and practice forms, Wharton's criminal law, LaFave on search and seizure, and criminal procedure, lots of non-Connecticut national titles.
Great, thank you. I'm going to give it back to Claudia now.
There is one last procedure which comes up frequently and can be a bit difficult, and we felt it should be addressed, and that is the procedure of prejudgment remedy. So, Tony, could you go over with us some of the resources for information on and sample pleadings regarding PJRs?
PJRs can be a challenge since this procedure requires a number of documents or forms together for the pleading. The documents include the notice, application, affidavit, order for hearing, summons for hearing, and the proposed summons, writ, and complaint. Other documents may be required if replevin is sought or if it's an ex parte action. Procedural information and required pleadings regarding PJRs can be found in many of the resources we have been discussing to this point. I might recommend first looking at the Judicial Branch Superior Court Civil Procedures page on prejudgment remedy on the branch's website. Here the basic procedure is laid out with references to governing statutes and some of the pleadings that are standardized judicial forms. Two treatises which I have found useful are the LexisNexis Practice Guide, Connecticut Civil Pretrial Practice, which has a good discussion covering when a PJR is appropriate, and a checklist of necessary pleadings, as well as samples of withdrawal or modification of a PJR. Connecticut Civil Practice Forms, Volumes 2, 3, and 3A of the Connecticut Practice Series, starting with Form 101.5, offers samples of some of the pleadings for requesting and defending against a PJR. Indeed, some of the specific, topic-specific form books we've mentioned already contain sample PJR pleadings. And even though these books are subject-specific publications, the sample PJR pleadings are not. Two good examples would be the Library of Connecticut Family Law Forms and the Library of Connecticut Collection Law Forms. And the Patron Access Westlaw Form Finder mentioned earlier would be another option for locating samples of the required pleadings, and the Connecticut Records and Briefs, finally, would be a rich source for examples of PJR pleadings as well. Really, many of the resources we covered in the scenarios to this point have excellent samples for PJRs.
Great, thank you for the explanation, Tony.